England, 1815. The Hartwell family carriage rattled through London's cobbled streets as Eleanor Hartwell gazed out the window, watching raindrops chase one another down the glass. At 38 years of age, with unremarkable features and a modest dowry, long since redirected to her younger sister's more promising matrimonial prospects, Eleanor had come to accept her station in life with quiet dignity. "Aunt Eleanor, you've crushed your flowers," exclaimed her niece, Sophia, a vision in pale blue silk, whose golden curls were arranged in perfect ringlets. Eleanor glanced down at the small posy in her gloved hands, now somewhat wilted from her absent-minded grip. "So I have. How careless of me." "It hardly matters," remarked Georgiana, Sophia's sister, with a dismissive wave of her fan. "No one will notice what you're wearing anyway, Aunt. You'll be seated with the chaperones all evening." From across the carriage, Eleanor's youngest sister, Margaret, barely 36 and already the mother of 3, exchanged a meaningful glance with her daughters. "Now, girls, that's quite enough. Your aunt is kind enough to accompany you tonight. Lord knows I cannot be trusted to keep you from mischief alone." The carriage fell silent, but Eleanor caught the slight curl of Margaret's lips, betraying her amusement at her daughter's observations. It was a familiar scene. The spinster aunt, grateful to be included, expected to fade into the wallpaper, while her beautiful nieces fluttered about the ballroom like exotic butterflies. "I hear the Duke of Ashford will be in attendance tonight," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "They say he's finally returned from his travels and is seeking a wife." "Heavens!" Georgiana clutched her sister's arm. "Do you think he might notice me? Mama, did you hear? The Duke of Ashford?" Margaret straightened her daughter's already immaculate gowns. "Remember your deportment, girls. A duke is a prize indeed, but such men can afford to be exceptionally selective." Eleanor studied her sister's face, recognizing the barely contained excitement. Margaret had married well, a baronet with substantial holdings, but to secure a duke for one of her daughters would elevate the entire family beyond their wildest aspirations. "I've heard he's terribly particular," Eleanor offered, rearranging her simple grey silk skirts, and rather serious in his demeanour. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her with identical expressions of surprise, as though they had forgotten she was capable of contributing to the conversation. "What would you know of the Duke's demeanour, Eleanor?" Margaret asked, her tone hovering between amusement and condescension. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I merely repeated what I heard Lady Harrington mention at tea last week." "Well," said Margaret, patting Eleanor's hand as one might soothe a child, "let us hope the Duke finds someone suitable tonight. Though not you, of course, dear sister. Your days of such concerns are behind you, thank goodness. How peaceful it must be." The carriage jolted to a stop before Eleanor could respond, and footmen appeared to assist them. As they entered the imposing townhouse of the Countess of Westfield, Eleanor took a steadying breath. Another evening of watching from the sidelines, of polite conversation with aging widows, of pretending not to notice the pitying glances. The ballroom was a vision of crystal and candlelight, with London's elite swirling across the polished floor in a kaleidoscope of silks and jewels. Eleanor followed her sister and nieces, carrying their fans and reticules when requested, accepting introductions with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Lady Margaret, Miss Sophia, Miss Georgiana, how delightful!" Their hostess, the Countess, greeted them warmly before her gaze settled on Eleanor. "And Miss Hartwell, is it not? How good of you to come." "Miss Eleanor Hartwell," Margaret corrected smoothly. "My elder sister." "Yes, of course." The Countess nodded, already looking past Eleanor to the next arriving guests. "Do enjoy yourselves, ladies." Within moments, Sophia and Georgiana were surrounded by admirers, while Margaret strategically positioned herself near several influential matrons. Eleanor drifted toward the row of chairs lining the wall, where other women of a certain age sat with resigned expressions. "Miss Hartwell," acknowledged Mrs. Pembroke, a round woman with sharp eyes. "Come to watch the spectacle again, have you?" "Good evening, Mrs. Pembroke." Eleanor settled beside her, arranging her skirts. "A lovely gathering, is it not?" "Lovely for some," Mrs. Pembroke sniffed. "Your nieces seem to be enjoying themselves tremendously." Eleanor followed her gaze to where Sophia laughed brightly, surrounded by no fewer than 5 gentlemen. "They are in high spirits tonight." "I heard the Duke of Ashford is expected," whispered Mrs. Pembroke. leaning closer. Handsome as sin and twice as wealthy, they say. Every unmarried girl, and quite a few married ones, will be making eyes at him tonight. As if summoned by her words, a ripple of excitement passed through the ballroom. Heads turned, conversations paused, and a path seemed to clear through the crowd. Eleanor craned her neck slightly, curiosity getting the better of her. He stood in the entrance, tall and imposing, his evening clothes impeccably tailored to broad shoulders. Dark hair, a strong jawline, and features that even from a distance could only be described as classically handsome. The Duke of Ashford had arrived. "My word," breathed Mrs. Pembroke. "The rumours didn't do him justice." Eleanor watched as he made his way through the room, stopping occasionally to exchange pleasantries. His manner reserved but courteous. There was something in his bearing that set him apart. A seriousness, perhaps, or a subtle wariness that contrasted with the eager faces surrounding him. "They say he needs to marry," continued Mrs. Pembroke. "His father left strict conditions in his will about securing the succession." Eleanor tore her gaze away. "How unfortunate to be forced into matrimony by legal documents." "Unfortunate?" Mrs. Pembroke chuckled. "My dear Miss Hartwell, there isn't a woman in this room who wouldn't trade places with his future Duchess. Present company accepted," Eleanor said with a small smile. Mrs. Pembroke gave her a knowing look. "Even you aren't so far past your prime as to be immune to such a man, I'd wager." Before Eleanor could respond, she noticed a commotion near the refreshment table. Sophia and Georgiana stood huddled with several other young ladies, their heads close together as they cast furtive glances across the room. Following their gaze, Eleanor saw the Duke engaged in conversation with a vision in crimson silk, Lady Vivian Ashworth, renowned beauty and daughter of the Earl of Blackwood. "Now there's a match society would approve," commented Mrs. Pembroke. "Lady Vivian has been the incomparable of the season for 3 years running." Indeed, Lady Vivian was everything Eleanor was not: young, exquisitely beautiful, wealthy and possessed of a confidence that bordered on arrogance. As Eleanor watched, Lady Vivian touched the Duke's arm lightly, her lips curving in a smile that was both inviting and calculated. The evening progressed in its predictable fashion. Eleanor watched her nieces dance, accepted a glass of punch from a passing footman, and made polite conversation with various matrons. She declined the few obligatory invitations to dance that came her way, typically from elderly gentlemen or very young boys fulfilling their social duties, preferring to avoid becoming a spectacle on the dance floor. During a particularly lively country dance, Eleanor slipped away from the ballroom, seeking a moment of respite in a small antechamber. The sounds of music and laughter faded as she closed the door behind her, leaving her in blessed quiet. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkened garden below. "Not fond of dancing, Miss Hartwell?" Eleanor whirled around, her heart leaping to her throat. The Duke of Ashford stood just inside the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Your Grace," she curtsied deeply, mortified at being discovered. "Forgive me. I didn't realize anyone was here." "Nor I," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "I was seeking a moment's peace from the enthusiasm of the ballroom." Eleanor clutched her hands together. "I shall leave you to your solitude, Your Grace." "No need." He gestured to the window. "There's room enough for 2 people seeking quiet." Uncertain, Eleanor remained where she was, studying him cautiously. Up close, the Duke was even more striking, his features sharp but harmonious, his eyes a startling shade of blue that reminded her of winter skies. "You seem surprised, Miss Hartwell," he observed. "That you know my name?" "Yes, I confess I am." A slight smile curved his lips. "We have mutual acquaintances. Lady Harrington speaks highly of your character." "Lady Harrington is most kind," Eleanor replied, wondering why this powerful man would remember such an inconsequential detail about her. The Duke moved to stand beside her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "I find these events rather tedious, don't you?" The candid admission surprised her. "It would be improper for me to agree with a duke, I think." This drew a genuine chuckle from him. "Yet your expression suggests you do agree." "Perhaps," she conceded, allowing herself a small smile, "though my nieces find them delightful." "Ah, yes, the Mrs. Sophia and Georgiana Barrett. Charming young ladies." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You've met them?" "Briefly. They were introduced to me upon my arrival, along with half the eligible young ladies in London." There was a weariness in his tone that Eleanor found strangely comforting, as though even the most sought-after man in England could find the marriage mart tiresome. A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the garden. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the faint scent of sandalwood and leather that surrounded him, of how utterly improper it was for her to be alone with him. "I should return," she said finally. "My sister will be wondering where I've gone." The Duke turned to her, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Will she? I rather thought most chaperones were given considerable latitude to come and go as they please." The observation stung, accurate though it was. "Nevertheless, Your Grace, I should not wish to be missed." He inclined his head. "Of course. It was a pleasure, Miss Hartwell." As Eleanor reached for the door, the Duke spoke again. "Miss Hartwell." She turned, her hand on the latch. "Yes, Your Grace? I hope we might continue our conversation at another time." Unsure how to interpret such a remark, Eleanor merely curtsied again before slipping back into the corridor, her heart beating a strange rhythm against her ribs. When she returned to the ballroom, no one had noticed her absence. Her sister was deep in conversation with a viscountess, while Sophia and Georgiana were the centre of a circle of admirers. Only Lady Vivian Ashworth, her crimson dress a splash of blood against the pastel silk surrounding her, seemed to notice Eleanor's re-entry, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly before she turned back to her companions with a dismissive tilt of her head. Eleanor resumed her seat, her mind still lingering on the strange encounter with the Duke. Whatever had possessed him to speak with her, and why had the brief conversation felt so comfortable? "There you are." Margaret appeared suddenly, her face flushed with excitement. "Where have you been hiding?" The Duke of Ashford himself asked after Sophia not 10 minutes ago. Eleanor's momentary peace evaporated. "Did he? How fortunate. Indeed, he may ask her to dance before the evening is out. Can you imagine? Our Sophia dancing with a duke." Margaret clutched Eleanor's hand, her eyes bright. "This could change everything for us, Eleanor. Everything." As Margaret hurried back to her daughters, Eleanor's gaze drifted across the room to where the Duke now stood. For the briefest moment, their eyes met, and she could have sworn he nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning his attention to the Countess at his elbow. It was nothing, of course, a coincidence, a courtesy. Men like the Duke of Ashford did not notice women like Eleanor Hartwell. Not truly. She was simply a momentary diversion, a respite from the clamouring debutantes and ambitious mothers. By tomorrow, he would not remember her name. 3 weeks later, Eleanor found herself once again playing the role of dutiful chaperone, this time at the Blackwood Ball, the most anticipated event of the season. The Earl of Blackwood's townhouse was magnificent, with its marble columns and gilded ceilings, its grand staircase draped in exotic flowers at what must have been ruinous expense. "Do stop fidgeting, Aunt Eleanor," Sophia hissed as they entered the ballroom. "You're drawing attention." Eleanor stilled her hands, which had indeed been nervously adjusting her lace collar. She wore her best gown tonight, a midnight blue silk that had been remodelled 3 times since its original making 6 years ago. It was respectable, if not fashionable, and the colour at least was flattering to her pale complexion and dark hair. "I apologize," she murmured. "The crowds make me somewhat anxious." Sophia rolled her eyes, already scanning the room for more interesting company. "Then do what you always do, and find a corner to hide in. Just don't embarrass us." "Sophia," Margaret admonished, though without much conviction. "Mind your tongue." They were interrupted by the approach of a young man with a pleasant face and eager manner. "Miss Sophia, I've been watching for you. Might I claim the first dance?" As Sophia was swept away, Georgiana close behind with her own partner, Margaret turned to Eleanor with a conspiratorial smile. "The Duke is here again tonight. He's danced with Sophia twice in the past fortnight." "Has he? How promising." Eleanor kept her tone neutral, though her stomach tightened inexplicably. "Lady Westfield says he's been most attentive to her at the Chamber's musical evening as well." Margaret preened. "Of course, Lady Vivian has been throwing herself in his path at every opportunity, but Sophia has youth on her side." Eleanor nodded absently, her gaze drawn across the room to where Lady Vivian stood in a stunning gown of emerald green, holding court amid a circle of admirers. The lady was undeniably beautiful, with her perfect features and glossy dark curls, but there was a hardness to her smile that Eleanor found unsettling. "Eleanor, are you listening to me?" Margaret prodded. Yes, of course. Sophia's prospects, very promising. Margaret sighed. Go and sit with Mrs. Pembroke, why don't you? I need to speak with Lady Harrington about the possibility of securing an invitation to her country estate this summer. Released from immediate duty, Eleanor made her way to the row of chairs where the chaperones and wallflowers congregated. Mrs. Pembroke was already there, resplendent in purple satin and an impressive turban adorned with feathers. Miss Hartwell, come sit by me and tell me what you make of the spectacle tonight. She patted the chair beside her. Have you noticed how Lady Vivian watches the Duke? Like a cat eyeing a particularly plump canary. Eleanor settled beside her. It's hardly surprising, he's the most eligible bachelor in England, and she's determined to be his Duchess. Mrs. Pembroke leaned closer. Though I hear he's been quite attentive to your niece, Miss Sophia. So my sister tells me. You don't sound particularly enthused. Eleanor sighed. I want Sophia to make a good match, of course. I just wonder if she's worthy of a duke. Mrs. Pembroke finished for her, eyebrows raised. No, that's not what I meant. Eleanor frowned. I wonder if they would suit. The Duke seems different from what one might expect. Mrs. Pembroke studied her curiously. And how would you know the Duke's character, my dear? Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. In the weeks since their encounter in the antechamber, she had seen the Duke at several events. Each time he had made a point of speaking with her, brief, proper conversations that nonetheless left her confused and oddly breathless. I've observed him, that's all, she replied. He seems more serious than most men of his station. Mrs. Pembroke's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Well, serious or not, he'll make some fortunate young lady a duchess before the season's end, mark my words. The evening progressed in its usual fashion. Eleanor watched the dancing, applauded politely at appropriate intervals, and tried not to notice how the Duke seemed to be watching her from across the room. Twice she thought he might be making his way toward her, only to be intercepted by Lady Vivian or another eager debutante. It was during the supper dance that disaster struck. Eleanor had declined to join the meal, preferring to remain in the ballroom where the crowds had thinned. She was standing near a column, enjoying a moment of solitude, when she overheard voices from the other side. Aunt Eleanor is so dreadfully dull, came Sophia's voice, pitched low but perfectly audible. Did you see that gown? I think it's the same one she wore to Cousin Edward's christening 3 years ago. A titter of laughter followed, and Eleanor recognized Georgiana's voice. At least she knows to stay out of our way. Could you imagine if she actually tried to attract attention? It would be mortifying. Poor spinster aunt, said a third voice, one of their friends perhaps. Does she never wish she had married? Who would have her? Sophia replied carelessly. No, she's resigned to her fate. Mama says we should be grateful she's content to be useful. Many old maids become bitter and difficult. Eleanor stood frozen, her fingertips pressing into the column beside her. She had always known how her nieces viewed her, of course, but to hear it stated so baldly, with such casual cruelty. Ladies, a new voice joined the conversation, cool, precise, and unmistakably belonging to Lady Vivian Ashworth. I couldn't help but overhear your charming assessment of your aunt. How fortunate she is to have such loyal family. There was a moment of awkward silence before Sophia spoke again, her voice now syrupy sweet. Lady Vivian, we were just demonstrating a remarkable lack of both compassion and good breeding, Lady Vivian cut in smoothly. Fascinating. Eleanor almost laughed at the irony, being defended by Lady Vivian of all people. She stepped away from the column, intending to retreat to some quieter corner to compose herself, when she collided with a solid form. Miss Hartwell. The Duke of Ashford steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Are you unwell? Eleanor looked up into his concerned face and felt something inside her crack. Perfectly well, Your Grace. If you'll excuse me. You are not well, he insisted, his voice low but firm. You're pale as a ghost. It's nothing. She attempted to step around him, merely the heat of the ballroom. The Duke glanced toward the column she had been standing near, where the voices of her nieces and Lady Vivian could still be heard, now engaged in stilted pleasantries. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Come, he said, offering his arm. Allow me to escort you to the terrace for some fresh air. It was improper, of course, a scandal waiting to happen. But Eleanor found herself too numb with humiliation to care. She placed her fingers lightly on his offered arm, and allowed him to guide her through a set of French doors onto the terrace that overlooked the gardens. The night air was cool against her heated skin, the distant sounds of music and laughter muted by the heavy doors closing behind them. Eleanor moved to the stone balustrade, drawing deep breaths, acutely aware of the Duke standing silently beside her. "I apologize for my momentary weakness, Your Grace," she said finally. "It was unforgivably dramatic of me." "There is nothing to forgive." His voice was gentle. "I heard enough to understand." Fresh mortification washed over her. "You heard them?" "Not intentionally." He joined her at the balustrade, his profile sharp against the night sky. "Your nieces lack both discretion and kindness, it seems." Eleanor stiffened. "They are young, Your Grace. Youth is often careless. You defend them even now." He sounded genuinely surprised. "They are my family," she said simply. The Duke was silent for a moment, studying her. "You are a remarkable woman, Miss Hartwell." A startled laugh escaped her. "I am many things, Your Grace, but remarkable has never been among them." "Then you have been surrounded by fools," he said with unexpected vehemence. Eleanor turned to face him fully, puzzled by his intensity. "Your Grace, I don't understand what—" "Christopher," he interrupted. "My name is Christopher." "I couldn't possibly—" "When we are alone," he amended, "I would like to hear my name from your lips, Eleanor." Her heart stuttered at the impropriety, at the intimacy of his using her given name. "Sir, this is most irregular." "Yes," he agreed, stepping closer. "It is." In the moonlight his eyes were dark and serious, his expression one of profound determination that made Eleanor's breath catch. She should step away, should insist on returning to the ballroom, should remember all the reasons why this moment could not possibly mean what her foolish heart wanted it to mean. "I have watched you these past weeks," the Duke, Christopher, continued. "I have observed your grace, your kindness, your quiet dignity in the face of slights that would embitter a lesser person. Your Grace, I told you my name," he reminded her softly. Eleanor swallowed. "Christopher," she whispered, the name foreign on her tongue. "I don't know what you want from me." "Everything," he said simply. "I want everything you are willing to give." She shook her head, bewilderment turning to something like panic. "This isn't— You can't possibly—" "But I can," he insisted. "I can and I do. I have never met anyone like you, Eleanor. Never known anyone with your strength of character, your intelligence, your genuine goodness." "You barely know me," she protested. "I know enough." His hand moved to cover hers on the balustrade. "I know that when I speak with you I don't need to pretend. I know that you see me, not my title, not my fortune, but me. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Eleanor's mind raced. This could not be happening. Men like the Duke of Ashford did not fall in love with plain spinsters of 30. There must be some other explanation, some motive she couldn't fathom. "What of Sophia?" she asked. "My sister says you've shown her particular attention." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "I have been polite to your niece, as I am to all young ladies introduced to me. Nothing more." "And Lady Vivian? Society expects—" "I care nothing for society's expectations," he interrupted. "Lady Vivian is beautiful, accomplished, and utterly without heart. I could never tie myself to such a woman." Eleanor withdrew her hand from beneath his. "What is it you want from me, Your Grace? Speak plainly, I beg you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. "I had hoped to court you properly, to show you my intentions through actions rather than words. But tonight, seeing you wounded by those who should cherish you—" He drew a deep breath. "I find I cannot wait any longer." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop as he took both her hands in his. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell," he said formally, "I wish to court you with the intention of making you my wife if you will have me." The world tilted beneath Eleanor's feet. "This is madness," she whispered. "Perhaps," he agreed, a smile touching his lips, "but it is sincere madness." Before she could respond, the French doors flew open, spilling light and music onto the terrace. Margaret stood there, flanked by Sophia and Georgiana, their faces masks of astonishment. "Eleanor!" Margaret's voice was shrill with shock. "What on earth are you doing out here, with His Grace no less?" Eleanor tried to pull her hands from the Duke's grasp, but he held firm, turning to face her family with cool composure. "Lady Margaret," he acknowledged with a slight bow, "I was just speaking with Miss Hartwell on a matter of some importance." I'm sure whatever it is can wait until a more appropriate time, as Margaret stammered, clearly torn between horror at finding her spinster sister alone with the Duke and fear of offending the most powerful man in the room. "It cannot wait," the Duke replied, his tone brooking no argument. "In fact, I believe this is the perfect moment." And before Eleanor could comprehend what was happening, the Duke of Ashford dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his, in full view of her astonished sister and nieces. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell," he said clearly, his voice carrying to where a small crowd had now gathered at the doors, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to process the scene unfolding before her. The Duke, Christopher, gazed up at her with unwavering certainty, while behind him Sophia's face had gone white with shock, Georgiana's mouth hung open in disbelief, and Margaret looked as though she might faint. And from the doorway, Lady Vivian Ashworth stared with cold fury in her emerald eyes. "Your Grace," Eleanor managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "you cannot mean this." "I have never meant anything more in my life," he replied, loud enough for all to hear. "Say yes, Eleanor." Time seemed to suspend itself. In that endless moment, Eleanor saw her life stretching before her in two distinct paths, one familiar and safe, but lonely, the other unknown, frightening, but filled with possibilities she had long ago stopped allowing herself to imagine. "Yes," she heard herself say, the word seeming to come from somewhere outside herself. "Yes, I will marry you." The Duke rose to his feet, his face transformed by a smile of such genuine joy that Eleanor's doubts momentarily receded. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, sending a shiver through her entire body. "My thanks for this great gift," he murmured, before turning to face the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I am pleased to introduce the future Duchess of Ashford." The silence that followed was broken by a single sound, the sharp crack of a fan snapping shut as Lady Vivian turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd. News of the engagement spread through London like wildfire. By morning, it was the only topic of conversation in drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs alike. The pattern was always the same: initial disbelief, followed by speculation about Eleanor's character or the Duke's sanity, culminating in the inevitable conclusion that she must possess some hidden quality that had captured his interest. "The gossip is relentless," Margaret complained, pacing Eleanor's bedchamber the following afternoon. "Lady Harrington called this morning to offer congratulations, but I could see the questions in her eyes. What am I supposed to tell people?" Eleanor sat at her dressing table staring at her reflection with a sense of unreality. "The truth, I suppose, that the Duke asked for my hand, and I accepted." "But why?" Margaret threw up her hands in exasperation. "Why you? Why not Sophia or any of the dozens of eligible young ladies who have been paraded before him this season?" The question stung, though Eleanor had asked herself the same thing countless times since the previous night. "I don't know, Margaret. He says he values my character." Margaret snorted. "Character? Men like the Duke of Ashford don't marry for character. They marry for beauty, connections, or fortune, none of which you possess in abundance, I'm sorry to say." "Thank you for that assessment," Eleanor replied dryly. Her sister stopped pacing and sank onto the edge of the bed. "I don't mean to be cruel, Eleanor. I'm simply bewildered and concerned." "Are you certain this isn't some kind of jest? The Duke doesn't strike me as a man who makes jests of this nature." "No, perhaps not." Margaret frowned. "Still, there must be something we're not seeing, some reason beyond the obvious." Eleanor turned to face her sister. "Is it truly so impossible to believe a man might value me for myself?" Margaret's expression softened. "Oh, Eleanor, I don't doubt your worth, but you must admit this is unprecedented. A duke, and one of the most eligible men in England at that." "I know." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "Believe me, I know how absurd it seems." A tentative knock at the door interrupted them. Sophia entered, her usual confident demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Aunt Eleanor," she began, hovering by the door, we, Georgiana and I, we wanted to offer our congratulations." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "How generous of you." Sophia flushed. "We also, that is, about what was said last night before the Duke." I believe I heard quite enough of your thoughts on the matter, Eleanor said quietly. Margaret looked between them. What's this? What did you say, Sophia? Sophia's blush deepened. Nothing of consequence, Mama, just girlish nonsense. They were discussing the many merits of having a spinster aunt, Eleanor supplied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. How useful I am. How fortunate they are that I'm not bitter about my circumstances. Sophia, Margaret looked genuinely shocked. You didn't. It was thoughtless, Sophia admitted, staring at the floor. I'm sorry, Aunt Eleanor, truly. Eleanor studied her niece, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. The hurt was still fresh, but Eleanor had never been one to nurture grudges. You are forgiven, Sophia, though perhaps in future you might remember that spinster aunts have ears. A ghost of a smile touched Sophia's lips, and dukes for fiancé, apparently. She hesitated, then asked, May I see the ring? Eleanor extended her left hand, where a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds now rested, delivered that morning by the Duke's private secretary, along with a note requesting her presence at tea the following day to discuss arrangements. Sophia gasped. It's beautiful. She peered closer. Those are Ashford sapphires. They've been in his family for generations. How would you know that? Margaret asked, her own eyes fixed on the ring with newfound interest. Lady Vivian mentioned it once, Sophia replied. She said the Ashford sapphires would look perfect with her complexion. Eleanor suppressed a smile. I imagine she's quite displeased with recent developments, then. Displeased is an understatement, Sophia said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Georgiana overheard her telling Lady Blackwood that she would see you ruined before she allowed you to take what rightfully belonged to her. Margaret's eyes widened. She threatened Eleanor? Not directly, Sophia amended. But everyone knows Lady Vivian doesn't make idle threats. She's vindictive when crossed. Eleanor twisted the ring on her finger, a flutter of unease disturbing her already unsettled stomach. She had expected society's disapproval, had steeled herself for whispers and stares, but active malice from a woman like Lady Vivian was another matter entirely. I'll be cautious, she promised, though what she could possibly do. Anything, Sophia cut in with uncharacteristic seriousness. She could do anything, Aunt Eleanor. Her family has connections throughout London. If she wants to destroy your reputation before the wedding, she has the means to do it. Margaret rose, suddenly businesslike. Then we must ensure the wedding takes place as soon as possible. The sooner you're a duchess, the safer you'll be from Lady Vivian's machinations. The Duke mentioned a June wedding, Eleanor said, recalling the brief discussion on the terrace after his proposal. June? Margaret frowned. That's 2 months away. Too long. We should press for May at the latest. Eleanor shook her head. I won't begin my marriage by making unreasonable demands. The Duke has been more than generous. I won't repay him with impatience. It's not impatience, Margaret insisted. It's prudence. Lady Vivian won't simply accept defeat. You need the protection of the Ashford name and title as soon as possible. Eleanor stood, suddenly weary of the conversation. I appreciate your concern, both of you, but I must handle this in my own way. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need some time alone. After they left, Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the street below. Across the way, a carriage with the Ashworth crest had been stationed for the past hour. A coincidence, perhaps, but Eleanor doubted it. The game had begun, it seemed. Tea at Ashford House the following day was both illuminating and disquieting. The Duke, Christopher as he insisted she call him in private, was as attentive and charming as ever, showing her through the grand rooms of what would soon be her home with obvious pride. The Duchess's chambers haven't been used since my mother's time, he explained, leading her into a suite of rooms decorated in a style that had been fashionable 20 years earlier. You may, of course, redecorate to your taste. Eleanor ran her fingertips along a delicate rosewood writing desk. It's beautiful as it is. Christopher studied her face. You're overwhelmed. A little, she admitted. Yesterday I was a spinster aunt living on my sister's charity. Today I'm to be mistress of all this. She gestured to encompass the grandeur surrounding them. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. You'll adapt magnificently. I have complete faith in you. The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. Why me? She asked softly, the question that had been burning inside her since his proposal. Of all the women in London, why choose someone like me? His expression grew serious. Because with you, I can be myself. Not the Duke, not the fortune, just the man. Do you know how rare that is? Every woman I've met since taking the title has seen only what I represent. Status, wealth, power. But you, he lifted a hand to her cheek, you see me. Eleanor wanted desperately to believe him, to trust in this miracle that had befallen her. But doubt lingered. And what of children? A duchess's primary duty is to provide an heir. I'm well aware of the expectations, he replied, his expression unchanged. I have every confidence in our ability to fulfill that particular duty. His lips curved in a smile that sent heat rushing to Eleanor's cheeks. At my age, she began, only to be silenced by his finger against her lips. You are 38, Eleanor, not ancient. Many women have their first child at your age or older. His voice softened. But even if that blessing were to elude us, I would not regret my choice. There are cousins aplenty to inherit if necessary. The tenderness in his gaze threatened to undo her completely. Eleanor stepped back slightly, needing distance to clear her head. You're very kind. Not kind, he corrected. Selfish, perhaps. I want you for myself, regardless of what society might say. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Christopher's solicitor, a severe-looking man named Mr. Winters, who carried a stack of documents for their review. The marriage settlements, Your Grace, he announced, placing the papers on a table. As requested, I've included the provisions for Miss Hartwell's personal allowance and widow's portion. Eleanor listened with growing astonishment as the terms were outlined. The Duke was offering her an unprecedented degree of financial independence, a generous quarterly allowance, properties in her name, jewels and carriages at her disposal, and a widow's portion that would make her one of the wealthiest women in England should he predecease her. This is excessive, she murmured when Mr. Winters had finished. It is appropriate for the Duchess of Ashford, Christopher replied firmly. I want you to have security, Eleanor. Independence. His generosity only deepened the mystery. What had she done to deserve such devotion from a man who barely knew her? The question lingered as they concluded their business, and Mr. Winters took his leave. As Christopher escorted her back to the drawing-room for tea, Eleanor noticed a portrait hanging in the gallery, a handsome older man with the same striking blue eyes as the Duke. My father, Christopher explained, following her gaze. He died 2 years ago. You resemble him, Eleanor observed. A shadow crossed Christopher's face. In appearance only, I hope. My father was a complicated man. Something in his tone made Eleanor pause. How so? Christopher hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. My father married my mother for her fortune, then made her life miserable with his infidelities and cruelty. She died when I was 12, broken in spirit long before her body failed. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said softly, understanding suddenly blooming. Is that why you value sincerity so highly? His eyes met hers, surprised and approving. Yes, I vowed I would never make the same mistake. I would marry only a woman of genuine character, someone incapable of the kind of deception my mother endured. And you believe I am such a woman? I know you are, he said with conviction. I've watched you, Eleanor. You have nothing to gain by pretense. You are exactly what you appear to be, kind, intelligent, dignified, and utterly genuine. The pieces were falling into place. Eleanor's lack of beauty, her modest circumstances, her age, all the things society saw as deficiencies, were to Christopher evidence of authenticity. He had chosen her precisely because she had nothing to recommend her but her true self. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. For the first time since his proposal, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this extraordinary man truly wanted her for herself. As he helped her into her carriage at the end of their visit, Christopher pressed a kiss to her gloved hand. Until tomorrow, my dear. I'll call for you at 11. Eleanor held his gaze, allowing herself a small, genuine smile. Until tomorrow, Christopher. She carried the warmth of that moment with her as the carriage pulled away, only to have it shattered when she noticed a familiar figure watching from a passing landau. Lady Vivian, her perfect features set in an expression of cold calculation. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor found herself thrust into a social prominence she had never experienced, invited to events, where she had previously been merely tolerated, courted by matrons who had once ignored her existence, and studied with frank curiosity by everyone from servants to duchesses. Through it all, Christopher remained attentive and supportive, escorting her to dinners and soirees, arranging meetings with modistes for her trousseau, and introducing her to the circle of friends and connections she would soon call her own. Eleanor came to treasure their private conversations, the moments when away from prying eyes they could speak freely. Christopher, she discovered, possessed a dry wit and a keen intellect that matched her own. He loved literature and music, despised pretension, and harbored a secret fondness for apple tarts that made him seem endearingly human despite his exalted position. But even as Eleanor's affection for her fiancé deepened, so too did Lady Vivian's campaign against her. It began subtly, invitations that mysteriously went astray, social slights too small to acknowledge but too pointed to ignore, whispers that fell silent when Eleanor entered a room. Then came more overt attacks. Anonymous letters were delivered to Ashford House, alleging improprieties in Eleanor's past. A rumour circulated that she had once been engaged to a merchant who had broken the engagement upon discovering some moral failing on her part. At a musical evening, Eleanor overheard Lady Vivian suggesting to a group of matrons that perhaps the Duke's sudden engagement indicated a necessity for haste that propriety forbade her from naming explicitly. "She's determined to destroy my reputation," Eleanor confided to Christopher one afternoon as they walked through the gardens of his country estate, where they had retreated for a few days of peace. "Let her try," he replied, his jaw set in determination. "No one who matters will believe her insinuations." "But don't you see, this is precisely why people are so eager to believe the worst. Our engagement makes no sense to society. They're looking for an explanation, and Lady Vivian is providing one." Christopher stopped, turning to face her. "Do you regret accepting my proposal?" "No," Eleanor answered without hesitation. "I could never regret that. But I fear what her vendetta might do to you, to your position." His expression softened. "My position is secure, Eleanor, and as for what people say, let them talk. In a month's time you'll be my wife, and Lady Vivian will be nothing more than a spiteful footnote in our story." Eleanor wished she could share his confidence, but a sense of foreboding had settled over her. Lady Vivian was not a woman to be underestimated, and her resources were considerable. What might she attempt as the wedding drew nearer? The answer came 3 days before the ceremony, at the Dowager Countess of Weston's garden party, the last major social event before Eleanor and Christopher were to be married. Eleanor had been separated from Christopher, drawn into conversation with several ladies who had recently begun to show her marked attention when she noticed a stir near the refreshment tables. Lady Vivian stood at the centre of a growing circle, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "Most extraordinary letter came into my possession. I could scarcely believe it myself, but the evidence is undeniable." Eleanor moved closer, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "It seems our dear Duke's sudden engagement may have less to do with love and more to do with, shall we say, financial necessity," Lady Vivian continued, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "My source at the Bank of England confirms that the Ashford estates are deeply mortgaged, the family fortunes all but depleted by the late Duke's excesses." A murmur ran through the crowd. Eleanor stood frozen, uncertain whether to confront the lie or seek Christopher. "But what has this to do with Miss Hartwell?" someone asked. "She brings no fortune to the match." Lady Vivian's smile was a knife's edge. "Ah, but she brings something perhaps more valuable, a convenient distraction." While London gossips about the Duke's peculiar choice of bride, none look too closely at his financial affairs, and by the time the truth emerges, he'll be safely married to a woman of no consequence who cannot possibly object to whatever measures he deems necessary to restore his fortunes. The implication was clear, that Christopher had chosen Eleanor precisely because she was so grateful for his attention that she would overlook any impropriety, any scheme to restore his supposedly ruined finances. Furthermore, Lady Vivian added, producing a folded paper from her reticule, "I have here a letter from a very reliable source indicating that the Duke has already begun selling off family heirlooms to satisfy his creditors." Eleanor could bear no more. "What a fascinating theory, Lady Vivian," she said, stepping into the circle, "though one wonders why you feel compelled to share it so publicly." Lady Vivian's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained fixed. "Miss Hartwell, how fortunate you could join us. I was just expressing my concern for your future happiness." "How kind," Eleanor replied evenly, "though I must correct a few inaccuracies in your account. The Ashford estates are not mortgaged, the family fortunes are quite intact, and my fiancé has not sold so much as a teaspoon from his collections." "You seem very certain," Lady Vivian countered. "Has the Duke shared his financial statements with you then?" "How unusual for a betrothed couple." "Not unusual at all for a couple who value honesty above pretense," Eleanor responded, surprising herself with her composure. "But perhaps such concepts are foreign to you, Lady Vivian." A titter ran through the assembled onlookers. Lady Vivian's cheeks flushed with anger. "You presume too much, Miss Hartwell. I have only the Duke's best interests at heart." "As do I," came Christopher's voice as he stepped into the circle, his expression thunderous. "Though I fail to see how spreading malicious falsehoods about my finances serves anyone's interests but your own, Lady Vivian." Lady Vivian's composure faltered for the first time. "Your Grace, I was merely attempting to damage my reputation and that of my future wife," he finished for her. "A strategy as transparent as it is despicable." "I have proof," she insisted, brandishing the letter. "From a source at the bank itself." Christopher took the paper from her hand and scanned it briefly before crumpling it in his fist. "A clumsy forgery, and not even an imaginative one. My bankers would never discuss my affairs with a third party, and certainly not in writing." "But as—" Lady Vivian began. "Enough." Christopher's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You have insulted me. You have insulted Miss Hartwell, and you have made yourself ridiculous in the process. I suggest you withdraw before you compound your error." For a moment, Lady Vivian stood frozen, her face a mask of humiliation and fury. Then, with a rustle of silk skirts, she turned and swept away through the parting crowd. Christopher immediately turned to Eleanor, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly. "Though I fear Lady Vivian will not forgive this public rebuke easily." "She brought it upon herself," he said grimly, "and I doubt she'll risk another such scene." But Eleanor wasn't so certain. As they moved through the gardens, accepting congratulations and expressions of support from those who had witnessed the confrontation, she could not shake the feeling that Lady Vivian's defeat had only made her more dangerous. That night, as Eleanor sat at her dressing table, her maid brushing out her hair for bed, a small package was delivered, a final gift from Christopher before their wedding, the footman explained. Inside the velvet box lay a delicate diamond bracelet with a note in Christopher's hand. "For my brave Eleanor, 3 days more until you are mine forever." Eleanor smiled, touching the diamonds with reverent fingertips. Whatever Lady Vivian might attempt next, she would face it with Christopher at her side. In 3 days' time she would be Duchess of Ashford, and all of this would be behind them. Or so she thought, until she noticed a second, smaller envelope that had fallen from the package onto her dressing table. This one bore no seal, no direction, just her name, written in an unfamiliar hand. With a sense of foreboding, Eleanor opened it and unfolded the single sheet within. "The Duke is not what he seems," it read in an elegant anonymous script. "Before you bind yourself to him forever, ask him about Elizabeth Barrett." Eleanor stared at the note, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Elizabeth Barrett. The name meant nothing to her, yet someone had gone to considerable trouble to ensure she received this warning on the eve of her wedding. Lady Vivian, surely. Another attempt to sabotage the match, more sophisticated than her clumsy lies about Christopher's finances. Yet even as Eleanor tried to dismiss the note, a seed of doubt took root. Who was Elizabeth Barrett? And why would knowledge of her change Eleanor's mind about marrying Christopher? She slept poorly that night, the question turning over and over in her mind. By morning, she had resolved to ask Christopher directly. Their relationship was founded on honesty, after all. If this Elizabeth was someone from his past, better to know now than to have the spectre hanging over their marriage. The opportunity came that afternoon, when Christopher called to finalize details for the wedding breakfast. They walked in the small garden behind Margaret's townhouse, the spring sunshine warm on their faces. "You seem troubled," Christopher observed, studying her with concern. "Second thoughts." Eleanor drew a steadying breath. Not about marrying you, no, but something unusual happened last night. She told him about the anonymous note, watching his face carefully as she spoke. To her dismay, she saw recognition flicker in his eyes at the mention of Elizabeth Barrett, followed swiftly by a guarded expression she had never seen him wear before. "I see," he said when she had finished, his voice carefully neutral. "Who is she, Christopher?" Eleanor asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment, gazing out at the garden as though gathering his thoughts. "She was my cousin," he said finally. "My father's niece." "Was?" "She died 7 years ago." His face had grown remote, shuttered. It was a great tragedy for the family. Eleanor studied him, sensing there was more to the story than he was revealing. "I'm sorry for your loss, but why would someone warn me about her?" Christopher's jaw tightened. "Because people enjoy meddling in affairs that don't concern them. Elizabeth's story is a sad one, but it has no bearing on our future together." "Then tell me," Eleanor pressed. "If it's of no consequence, why not share it?" A flash of something, anger, fear, crossed his face before he mastered himself. "Very well. Elizabeth was a beautiful, spirited girl who lived with us after her parents died. She was like a sister to me. When she turned 18, my father arranged a marriage for her with a wealthy baron, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty." Eleanor's heart sank. She didn't want the match. She was desperate to avoid it, Christopher confirmed. "She begged my father to release her from the engagement, but he refused. The baron's connections were too valuable, the financial arrangements too advantageous to our family." "What happened to her?" Christopher's expression darkened. "The night before her wedding, she took her own life. She left a note blaming my father for forcing her into a match she couldn't bear." Eleanor covered her mouth with her hand. "How terrible!" "It was," he agreed grimly. "The scandal was immense. The baron threatened to sue for breach of contract. My father paid him off and hushed up the true circumstances of Elizabeth's death. Publicly, she died of a fever. Only family and a few close servants knew the truth." "I'm so sorry, Christopher," Eleanor said softly, reaching for his hand. "What a burden to carry." He accepted her touch but remained tense. "Now you understand why I was reluctant to speak of it. It's a dark chapter in my family's history, one I've tried to put behind me." "Of course," Eleanor nodded. "Thank you for telling me." Yet as they continued their walk, discussing wedding arrangements with forced cheerfulness, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something about Christopher's account rang false. Not the facts themselves, perhaps, but the telling of them as though he had rehearsed the story, smoothing away rough edges that might catch on closer examination. When Christopher took his leave an hour later, kissing her hand with his usual tenderness, Eleanor was left with more questions than answers. Who had sent the note? And why now, just days before the wedding? The answer came in the form of an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was in the drawing room, reviewing final arrangements for her wedding clothes, when the maid announced Lady Harrington. "My dear Miss Hartwell," the older woman greeted her, accepting a seat near the fire. "Forgive the intrusion, but I felt compelled to call on you before your big day." "It's no intrusion at all," Eleanor assured her, though she was puzzled by the visit. Lady Harrington had always been kind to her, but they were not particularly close. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you, I won't stay long." Lady Harrington removed her gloves, her expression unusually grave. "I've come about a rather delicate matter, concerning your fiancé." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Oh? I understand you received a message about Elizabeth Barrett." Eleanor stared at her in shock. "It was you who sent the note?" Lady Harrington nodded. "I did. And before you ask, no, I am not trying to prevent your marriage. On the contrary, I have the highest regard for the Duke and believe he will make you an excellent husband." "Then why?" "Because you deserve to know the whole truth before you make your vows," Lady Harrington said firmly. "The Duke told you about Elizabeth's death, I presume?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "He said she took her own life rather than marry the man his father had chosen for her." "That much is true," Lady Harrington acknowledged. "But there's more to the story. A part the Duke may be reluctant to share, though it reflects no ill on him personally." Eleanor clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Please, continue." "Elizabeth was with child when she died," Lady Harrington said quietly. "The father was a young man of good family but modest means, someone the late Duke considered entirely unsuitable. When he discovered the relationship, He arranged the marriage to the Baron immediately to conceal the scandal. "How do you know this?" Eleanor asked, her throat tight with emotion. "Because the young man was my nephew," Lady Harrington replied, her eyes shadowed with old grief. "He loved Elizabeth desperately. They had planned to elope, but the Duke discovered their plans and locked Elizabeth in her room until the wedding. When she died," Lady Harrington paused, composing herself, "my nephew was destroyed by guilt and grief. He joined the army and was killed in Spain less than a year later." Eleanor sat in stunned silence, absorbing this new information. It explained Christopher's reluctance to discuss Elizabeth, certainly. But why had Lady Harrington felt it necessary to tell her now? "I don't understand," she said finally. "This is a tragic story, but as you said, it reflects no ill on the Duke himself. He was barely more than a boy when it happened." "True," Lady Harrington agreed, "but there's one more thing you should know. After Elizabeth died, the Duke swore a vow at her graveside. He promised that when he came into his title, he would never force anyone in his care into an unwanted marriage, nor would he allow family considerations to overrule matters of the heart." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're suggesting that his proposal to me was motivated by that vow," Lady Harrington finished for her, "at least in part. The Duke has been under immense pressure from his family and peers to make an advantageous match. Lady Vivian was the favoured candidate, beautiful, wealthy, impeccably connected. By choosing you instead, forgive my bluntness, a woman society considered firmly on the shelf, he made a statement. He defied the very expectations that had doomed his cousin." Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "You're saying he proposed to me not out of love, but as some kind of rebellion, a gesture of defiance?" Lady Harrington shook her head. "Not solely, no. I believe he genuinely admires and respects you, Miss Hartwell, but I thought you should understand all the factors that may have influenced his choice." "Why tell me this now? The wedding is in 2 days." "Because I believe in informed decisions," Lady Harrington said simply, "and because I saw how Lady Vivian was attempting to undermine your confidence. I thought the truth, however complicated, would be better than her malicious insinuations." After Lady Harrington departed, Eleanor sat motionless, trying to make sense of her churning emotions. If what she had learned was true, Christopher's proposal was not the simple declaration of love she had believed, but something far more complex. A gesture of atonement, perhaps, or defiance against the system that had destroyed his cousin. Did it matter? He had been kind, attentive, respectful. He had defended her against gossip and slander. Did his motivations change the fact that he had chosen her above all others? Yes, she decided with a heavy heart. It mattered very much indeed. The confrontation came that evening, when Christopher called unexpectedly, eager to share news about an additional wedding gift he had arranged. He found Eleanor in the small sitting room she used as her private retreat, her face pale and composed, her eyes shadowed with doubt. "What's happened?" he asked immediately, crossing to take her hands. "Are you unwell?" Eleanor gently withdrew her fingers from his grasp. "I had a visitor today, Lady Harrington." Something flickered in Christopher's eyes, awareness perhaps, or resignation. "I see." "She told me about Elizabeth," Eleanor continued. "The full story." He turned away, moving to the window with uncharacteristic restlessness. "I should have realized she might approach you. Lady Harrington has always felt responsible for what happened, though she wasn't to blame." "Why didn't you tell me yourself?" Eleanor asked quietly. "About Elizabeth's pregnancy, about her plans to elope." Christopher's shoulders tensed. "It wasn't my secret to share, and it changes nothing about us." "Doesn't it?" Eleanor rose, her composed facade beginning to crack. "Lady Harrington seems to think it explains a great deal about your proposal." He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "What exactly did she say?" "That you made a vow at Elizabeth's grave. That you promised never to let family expectations dictate matters of the heart." Eleanor took a steadying breath. "She suggested that choosing me, an unlikely bride by society's standards, was your way of honoring that vow, of defying the system that killed your cousin." Christopher was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. "And if that were partly true," he said finally, "would it change your feelings for me?" The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard. I don't know." I thought you chose me because you saw something in me that others had overlooked, not because I represented some kind of symbolic rebellion. Why can't both be true? He challenged, taking a step toward her. Yes, I made that vow. Yes, I've carried Elizabeth's fate with me all these years. And when I met you, a woman of intelligence, dignity, and genuine worth who had been overlooked and undervalued by a shallow society, I saw an opportunity to make good on my promise, while also gaining a companion I could genuinely respect. A companion, Eleanor echoed, the word falling like a stone. Not a love match, then? Frustration flashed across Christopher's face. Is that what you wanted? Pretty words and passionate declarations? I thought you valued honesty above sentiment. We're not lovesick children, Eleanor. We're adults who recognize the potential for something real and lasting between us. I did value your honesty, she replied, hurt, sharpening her tone. Which is why discovering you withheld significant truths feels like such a betrayal. I told you about Elizabeth, he countered. You told me what you thought I needed to know. You edited the story to suit your purposes. Eleanor's voice caught. Just as you've edited our story, apparently, presenting it as a simple case of recognition and appreciation, when in fact your motivations were far more complex. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had never seen from him before. What would you have had me say? Miss Hartwell, I find you admirable and appealing, and marrying you would also satisfy a decades-old promise to my dead cousin. Would that have been better? At least it would have been honest. Eleanor's composure finally broke. I would rather have uncomfortable truths than comfortable half-truths, Christopher. A tense silence fell between them. Outside, rain had begun to fall, pattering against the window panes like a counterpoint to their troubled breathing. I never lied to you, Christopher said at last, his voice low and intense. Everything I said about admiring your character, about valuing your sincerity, that was all true. Is it so hard to believe that a man might have complex, multi-layered reasons for his choices? Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. No, but it is hard to believe in a future built on partial disclosures. What else haven't you told me, Christopher? What other motivations lie behind your interest in me? His expression hardened. You've made up your mind, I see. Nothing I say now will convince you of my sincerity. That's not true, Eleanor protested, though in her heart she wasn't certain. The revelation had shaken her more deeply than she wanted to admit. I just need clarity, transparency. Very well. Christopher straightened, his face settling into the aristocratic mask he wore in public, the one she had thought never applied to her. I chose you because I believed you would make an excellent duchess, intelligent, dignified, mature enough to handle the responsibilities of the position without being dazzled by its privileges. I chose you because, unlike every other eligible woman in London, you seemed to see me as a man, not just a title. And yes, I chose you partly because doing so fulfilled a promise I made long ago, to value character over convention. He paused, his eyes intent on her face. If those reasons aren't enough for you, if you were hoping for protestations of undying passion from a man who has only known you for a matter of weeks, then perhaps Lady Vivian was right about one thing. We are ill-suited after all. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Eleanor felt them like physical blows, each one chipping away at the fragile happiness she had allowed herself to believe in. Perhaps we are, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Christopher's face betrayed a flash of something, regret, pain, before settling back into impassivity. Then I release you from our engagement, Miss Hartwell. I'll make the necessary announcements myself to spare you the gossip as much as possible. He bowed formally, as though they were strangers at a ball rather than lovers on the brink of marriage. I wish you every happiness. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that nonetheless echoed in Eleanor's ears like a thunderclap. She sank onto a chair, the full weight of what had just happened crashing over her like a wave. The wedding was off. The dream, for that's what it had been, she now realized, was over. Tomorrow, London would buzz with the news of the Duke's broken engagement, of Eleanor Hartwell's return to obscurity and spinsterhood. Her brief moment in the sun had ended, and the shadows of her former life stretched before her once more. Yet beneath the pain and humiliation, a small, stubborn part of Eleanor refused to surrender to despair. Christopher had chosen her, imperfect, complex motivations and all. And in the weeks they had spent together, she had come to know him as few others did. The man who laughed at her dry observations, who listened to her opinions with genuine interest, who looked at her as though she were precious beyond words. Was that man a lie? Or had he simply been more complicated, more human, than the romantic hero she had built up in her imagination? As the night deepened around her, Eleanor confronted a truth she had been avoiding. Somewhere along the way, despite her best efforts at caution, she had fallen in love with the Duke of Ashford. Not with his title or his wealth or the status he could confer, but with the man himself, with Christopher, in all his flawed, human complexity. And in her hurt pride, she had thrown away the one thing she had never expected to find, a chance at real happiness. Morning brought no relief from Eleanor's torment. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every word of their confrontation, searching for things she might have said differently, moments when pride might have given way to understanding. Margaret arrived early, her face etched with concern. "Eleanor, what's happened? The Duke's secretary delivered a note at dawn, something about urgent business requiring His Grace to leave town immediately." Eleanor looked up from the window where she had been sitting since sunrise. "The wedding is off, Margaret. We've ended our engagement." "What?" Margaret's shock was palpable. "Why? How? Eleanor, what have you done?" The accusation stung, though Eleanor couldn't blame her sister for assuming she was at fault. "I discovered that the Duke's reasons for proposing weren't as straightforward as I had believed. We disagreed about whether that mattered." Margaret sank onto a chair, her face pale. "Oh, Eleanor. Surely whatever his reasons, becoming a duchess would have been worth a little compromise." "Is that what you think of me?" Eleanor asked quietly. "That I would sell myself for a title." "That's not what I meant," Margaret backtracked, though her expression suggested otherwise. "But opportunities like this don't come twice in a lifetime, especially for women in your situation." "My situation?" Eleanor repeated flatly. "You mean my advanced age and unexceptional looks?" Margaret had the grace to flush. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Eleanor interrupted, too exhausted for pretense. "And a week ago I might even have agreed with you. But I've learned something about myself these past few weeks, Margaret. I've discovered that I would rather have honesty without a title than a coronet built on half-truths." Her sister stared at her as though she had sprouted a second head. "You're not making sense, Eleanor. What half-truths? The Duke has been nothing but attentive and generous." Eleanor sighed, unwilling to share the full story of Elizabeth Barrett. "It's complicated. And ultimately private. All that matters is that we've agreed to part ways." "But the wedding, the guests, the preparations!" Margaret's voice rose in distress. "What will people say?" "They'll say exactly what they said when the engagement was announced," Eleanor replied with weary resignation. "That it was absurd for a man like the Duke to choose a woman like me, that it could never have lasted, that order has been restored to their comfortable world." "And you're content with that?" Margaret demanded. "With returning to your previous existence?" The question hung in the air, forcing Eleanor to confront the reality of her choice. Could she truly go back to being the spinster aunt, the overlooked sister, the woman whose primary value lay in her usefulness to others, after having glimpsed a different life, one of respect, independence, and genuine companionship? "No," she admitted finally. "I'm not content with it. But I would be even less content in a marriage founded on incomplete truths." Margaret shook her head, clearly baffled by her sister's stance. "I hope you know what you're doing, Eleanor. Opportunities like this don't come twice in a lifetime," Eleanor finished for her. "Yes, you mentioned that." As Margaret left to begin the painful process of notifying guests and cancelling arrangements, Eleanor returned to her vigil by the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening in the pale morning light. Across the way, a young couple walked arm in arm, their heads bent close together in conversation. Had she been a fool to let Christopher go, to place such importance on his complex motivations when his actions had consistently shown care and respect? Was perfect transparency even possible between two people still learning each other's hearts? Eleanor's reflections were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Without waiting for her response, Sophia burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Aunt Eleanor, you'll never believe what's happening." Eleanor turned wearily. "I'm not in the mood for gossip, Sophia." "It's not gossip, it's about Lady Vivian." Sophia rushed to Eleanor's side, her eyes bright. She's been caught in the most dreadful scandal. Apparently she forged letters from the Bank of England attempting to discredit the Duke's finances, and now her father has withdrawn her from society and is sending her to their estate in Scotland. Eleanor straightened, her attention caught despite herself. What? It's true. Mrs. Pembroke's maid heard it from Lady Blackwood's footman. The Earl is furious. He's threatened to disinherit Lady Vivian if there's any further embarrassment to the family. Sophia could barely contain her glee. Isn't it delicious, after all her airs and ambitions, to end up disgraced and exiled to the country? Sophia, Eleanor chided automatically, though her mind was racing. We shouldn't take pleasure in others' misfortunes. Sophia waved away the reproof. Oh, but that's not all. The Duke called on Lady Harrington this morning. Georgiana and I were there taking tea with her granddaughter. He looked absolutely thunderous, Aunt Eleanor. They spoke privately for nearly an hour, and when he emerged, he asked Lady Harrington the most extraordinary question. Eleanor's heart quickened. What question? He asked her what a man should do when the woman he loves doubts his intentions, Sophia said, watching Eleanor's face closely. Lady Harrington told him that actions speak louder than words, and that some gestures cannot be misinterpreted. I see, Eleanor murmured, though her mind was in turmoil. Christopher had gone to Lady Harrington, the very woman whose revelations had triggered their argument. What could it mean? Sophia sat beside her, suddenly serious. Aunt Eleanor, is it true? Has the engagement been broken? Eleanor hesitated. How did you hear about that? Mama told us this morning. She was quite upset. Sophia bit her lip. But I don't understand. The Duke is clearly devoted to you. Anyone with eyes can see it. It's complicated, Sophia. Is it? Sophia challenged, displaying unexpected maturity. Because from what I've observed, he looks at you the way Papa used to look at Mama, like you're the center of his world. Eleanor blinked, startled by the observation. That's not... It is, Sophia insisted. I know I've been thoughtless, Aunt Eleanor. I said cruel things about you that I deeply regret, but even I can see that the Duke of Ashford loves you. Whatever has happened between you, surely that's worth fighting for. Before Eleanor could respond, the maid appeared at the door. Excuse me, miss. There's a gentleman here to see you, the Duke of Ashford. Eleanor's heart leapt to her throat. The Duke? Here? Yes, miss. He's most insistent. Sophia jumped to her feet, squeezing Eleanor's hand. Remember what I said, Aunt. Some things are worth fighting for. With that, she slipped out, leaving Eleanor to compose herself as best she could. A moment later, Christopher stood in the doorway, his expression a complex mixture of determination and vulnerability that made her breath catch. Miss Hartwell, he began formally, then seemed to abandon pretense. Eleanor, forgive the intrusion, but I couldn't leave matters as they stand between us. Eleanor rose on unsteady legs. I thought you had left town. A necessary fiction, he admitted. I needed time to attend to certain matters before seeing you again. What matters? Christopher moved further into the room, stopping a respectful distance from her. I went to see Lady Harrington this morning. We had a frank conversation about her revelations to you. I heard, Eleanor said softly. Did you also hear that she regrets the pain her well-intentioned disclosure caused? Christopher asked. She meant to arm you with the truth against Lady Vivian's machinations, not to drive a wedge between us. Eleanor studied his face, so dear to her despite everything. It wasn't Lady Harrington who drove that wedge, Christopher. It was the realization that you had withheld significant truths from me. Yes, he acknowledged, surprising her with his directness. I did, and I was wrong to do so. I told myself I was protecting Elizabeth's memory, and perhaps there was truth in that. But I was also protecting myself from vulnerability, from the risk of revealing too much of my heart. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The truth, Eleanor, the whole truth, is that I began with complex motivations. Yes, Elizabeth's fate influenced me. Yes, I was drawn to you partly because you represented a different path, a rejection of the values that had destroyed her. But what began as admiration and respect quickly became something far deeper and more profound. Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. What are you saying, Christopher? I'm saying that I love you, he declared, the words ringing with conviction. Not as a symbol or a statement, but as a woman. Intelligent, dignified, compassionate, and utterly irreplaceable. I love your quiet strength, your wry observations, your unflinching honesty. I love the way you see through pretense, the way you value substance over show. I love that you demanded complete truth from me, even at the cost of your own happiness. Eleanor remained motionless, afraid that if she moved or spoke, the moment would shatter like glass. Christopher continued, his voice deepening with emotion. I was a coward yesterday. When you questioned my motives, I retreated behind pride rather than admitting the truth, that somewhere in these past weeks, you have become essential to me. That the thought of living without you feels like contemplating a return to darkness after knowing light. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. I cannot promise perfect transparency at every moment, Eleanor. I am a flawed man with a lifetime of habits not easily broken, but I can promise to try, to share my thoughts, my fears, my hopes with you as no one else. I can promise to build a life with you founded on mutual respect and growing love. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. Christopher, Before you answer, he interrupted gently, there's something you should know. The announcement of our broken engagement has not been made. No one beyond your immediate family is aware of our disagreement. If you choose to send me away now, I will honor your decision with the utmost discretion and respect. Your reputation will remain untouched. The gesture, offering her a clean, dignified exit if she wanted it, touched Eleanor deeply. This was the man she had come to love, honorable, considerate, willing to place her needs above his own pride. And if I don't send you away? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hope blazed in his eyes. Then the wedding proceeds as planned. We marry tomorrow, not as strangers bound by convenience or duty, but as partners who have glimpsed each other's true selves and chosen to walk forward together anyway. Eleanor took a deep breath, searching his face for any hint of reservation or deceit. She found only sincerity, vulnerability, and a love that mirrored her own. I love you, Christopher, she confessed, the words both terrifying and liberating. Not the Duke, not the fortune, but you, with all your complexities and contradictions. I was hurt yesterday not because your motivations were imperfect, but because I feared I had built our relationship on false assumptions. No false assumptions, he assured her, only incomplete information. A situation I hope we can remedy over a lifetime together. Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of doubt lift from her heart. I would like that very much. Christopher's face transformed with joy. He drew her into his arms, holding her as though she were infinitely precious. Is that a yes, Eleanor? Will you still be my wife? In answer, she lifted her face to his. Their lips met in a kiss that contained all the promises words could not express. A pledge of honesty, partnership, and a love that had been tested by truth and emerged stronger for it. The wedding of the Duke of Ashford and Miss Eleanor Hartwell took place the following day as planned, though with a depth of emotion few guests could have anticipated. As Eleanor walked down the aisle of St. George's Church, her midnight blue eyes locked with Christopher's, she felt none of the doubt or reservation that had plagued her in previous days. This was no fairy tale, no miraculous transformation of a spinster into a princess. It was something far more valuable, the joining of two complex, flawed human beings who had chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts. Sophia and Georgiana preceded her as bridesmaids, their faces alight with genuine happiness for their aunt. Margaret watched from the front pew with an expression of mingled bewilderment and relief, and from a discreet position near the back of the church, Lady Harrington nodded in quiet approval as the couple exchanged their vows. Lady Vivian Ashworth was conspicuous by her absence, though the whispers of her downfall provided a satisfying undertone to the celebrations. Society might never understand what had drawn the Duke of Ashford to the unremarkable Miss Hartwell, but as the couple departed the church amid a shower of flower petals and well-wishes, not even the most cynical observer could doubt the genuine affection that passed between them. 6 months later, the Duchess of Ashford stood in the morning room of their country estate, reading a letter with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Good news?" Christopher asked, entering with the easy familiarity of a man completely at home with his wife. Eleanor smiled, setting down the paper. "From Margaret. It seems Sophia has received an offer from Lord Blackwood's youngest son. A love match, by all accounts." "Excellent," Christopher approved, coming to stand beside her, Your niece has shown remarkable growth in character these past months. I attribute it entirely to your influence." "Hardly," Eleanor demurred, though she was pleased by the observation. She simply needed to look beyond her own interests to develop compassion. Christopher slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her against his side, a quality her aunt possesses in abundance. Eleanor leaned into his embrace, still sometimes amazed by the easy affection between them. "I had a letter from Lady Harrington as well. She mentions that Lady Vivian has become engaged to a Scottish baron. Apparently exile has suited her. She writes that Lady Vivian seems genuinely transformed by her time away from London society." "Redemption comes in many forms," Christopher murmured. "I wish her well." "As do I," Eleanor agreed, surprised to discover she meant it. The woman who had once seemed such a formidable enemy now appeared merely young and misguided, as Eleanor herself might have been in different circumstances. Christopher's hand moved to rest lightly on her abdomen, still flat beneath her morning dress. "And how are you feeling today? Any improvement?" Eleanor covered his hand with her own, a private smile passing between them. The news was still too new, too precious to share widely, but the doctor had confirmed it just days ago. By spring, the Ashford nursery would have an occupant for the first time in nearly 3 decades. "Much better," she assured him, "though Mrs. Winters insists I should rest more." "Wise woman, my housekeeper," Christopher said gravely, though his eyes danced with happiness. "Perhaps we should heed her advice. A quiet morning in the library? I could read to you." Eleanor lifted her face for his kiss, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From overlooked spinster to beloved wife, from resigned spectator to active participant in her own happiness. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "But first I have something for you." She moved to her writing desk and withdrew a small leather-bound volume. "I found this among your mother's possessions when we were reorganizing the family wing. I thought you might want to have it." Christopher opened the book carefully. Inside was a collection of pressed flowers, each labeled in a delicate feminine hand, with dates and locations noted beside them. "My mother's herbarium," he murmured, his fingers tracing the fragile specimens. "I had forgotten she kept this." "There's something else," Eleanor said gently, turning to the final page. There, pressed between the leaves, was a sprig of heather with a notation. "Elizabeth's favourite. May she find peace at last." Christopher's breath caught. "She knew," he whispered. "Mother knew about Elizabeth's unhappiness. She tried to help in her quiet way." "She did what she could within the constraints of her position," Eleanor agreed. "Just as you did, years later." He looked up, his eyes bright with emotion. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "Practice," she replied with a smile, "and the confidence that comes from being truly known and loved anyway." Christopher closed the book carefully, then drew his wife into his arms. "Eleanor Ashford," he said softly, using the name that still thrilled her with its newness. "You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." As they stood together in the sunlit room, surrounded by the legacy of the past and the promise of the future, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that this imperfect, complicated, wonderful love was a richer ending than any fairy tale could provide. Not because a duke had chosen a spinster, but because two people had found in each other exactly what they needed: understanding, acceptance, and the courage to be fully themselves, together. The end. Dear listener, isn't it curious how a fictional story set 2 centuries ago can illuminate corners of your heart you thought long forgotten? Eleanor's journey isn't just ink on paper, it's an invitation to reclaim the chapters of your life that others have tried to close prematurely. Society speaks in absolutes: too old, past your time, settled in your ways. What magnificent nonsense! The clock that measures life's richest possibilities has no relationship to the one on your wall. Think of the garden that blooms in October when others have withered. Think of the evening sky, how it reserves its most spectacular colors not for the busy morning, but for the day's graceful conclusion. You are not diminished by your years. You are distilled by them. Tonight, as you lay your head down, whisper this truth to yourself. The most revolutionary act in a world obsessed with youth is to embrace your journey with unapologetic joy. Your value was never found in smooth skin or boundless energy, but in the unique constellation of experiences that make you magnificently you. Eleanor didn't just find love. She found herself beneath layers of expectations she'd internalized. Her greatest triumph wasn't capturing a duke's heart, but rediscovering her own worth independent of others' validation. Tomorrow, look in the mirror and greet yourself as you would a dear friend. Notice not what time has taken, but what it has carefully sculpted. The laugh lines that mark moments of joy, the steady gaze that has witnessed both heartbreak and wonder. Your story continues to unfold in ways the younger you could never have imagined. The most beautiful plot twists often arrive when the audience least expects them. Stand tall in the knowledge that you are not an epilogue. You are still very much the protagonist in a tale being written with each sunrise. Sleep peacefully tonight, cradled in the certainty that your most authentic self, the one that has weathered disappointments and celebrated quiet victories, is precisely the person the world needs now. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Eleanor and Christopher's journey. If their story touched something in your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, writing a comment, and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear a tale of love and second chances. From the bottom of our hearts, your support is what keeps us going, helping us feel encouraged to create more stories filled with love, redemption, and unforgettable twists. At the end of this video, you'll see another suggested story from our channel. Click and be surprised by yet another emotional journey waiting just for you. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.